Welcome back to another explainer. Man, I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're diving into a truly chilling narrative from Scary Town. Now look, we aren't just unpacking your run-of-the-mill ghost story today. Note, we are going to look at the terrifying real-world mechanics of how systemic injustice, nepotism, and apathy can create consequences that quite literally come back to haunt us. We're talking about the dark, tragic secret of Ramganj Station. So grab a notebook because the way this story weaves biting social commentary into just absolute terror, well, it's pretty fascinating.
All right, let's just jump right in. We're starting with this incredibly dismissive quote from a station watchman. "Well, nothing, madam. She was crazy. Laid down on the tracks and gave her life." On the surface, he's just explaining away a local ghost rumor to a new employee. But listen to that language. She was crazy. It completely strips this victim of her humanity, right? And totally ignores the context of her pain. It's actually a striking example of how society so often just sweeps the tragedies of the powerless right under the rug. They get brushed off as, hysterical or insane, rather than recognize as victims of a system that completely broke them.
Which, of course, brings us to a pretty terrifying question. What actually happens when the past refuses to stay buried? In horror, the supernatural is almost always a manifestation of unresolved trauma or unpunished guilt. When the law fails, when society just turns a blind eye, well, the narrative often forces a reckoning from beyond the grave. The ghosts in these types of stories aren't just monsters. They're literally the physical embodiment of a guilty conscience. So let's get into Section 1, the unearned advantage, covering privilege and power. Because before we can even get to the ghosts, we really have to look at the monsters living in the daylight. And the core conflict here is perfectly set up. It lies in the unearned privilege of a young woman named Ashika, directly contrasting with the totally unrewarded merit of a man named Ramesh. Think about this. Ashika wakes up late, rushes to her interview, completely ignores the other waiting candidates, and just walks right in. And get this. The interviewer literally tells her to her face that she's only getting the job because of her father's influence. She even laughs at the other girls on her way out. Now contrast that with Ramesh. Here's the guy who did everything right. He studied hard, scored the absolute highest marks on the railway exams, but was completely shut out. Why? Simply because he didn't have the right connections. It's a totally soul-crushing reality, but it sets the stage for everything that follows. Which brings us to Section 2. A haunted night shift, focusing on the arrival at Ramganj. With this deeply unfair foundation established, the narrative shifts to Ashika's very eerie arrival at this desolate station for her night shift. She's expecting an easy ride, but the environment instantly tells us, and her, that something is horribly wrong. The atmosphere is just chilling from the get-go. When she arrives, the station is pitch black and utterly abandoned. When the watchman finally manages to open up the station master's office, she finds this absolute mess. A broken TV, rotten food, scattered cigarettes everywhere. We find out the station office was literally sealed by the police and left in this filthy state. Why? Because the previous officer suffered a gruesome, agonizing death right out there on the train tracks. So yeah, this isn't just an untidy workspace, it's a preserved crime scene just reeking of dread. Now notice how the tension ramps up through 3 very specific steps right before the big narrative twist drops. First off, Ashika has this terrifying hallucination of a woman with long hair completely covering her face, who warns her to leave. Step 2, she jars awake, only to find a creepy watchman just hovering over her in the dim light. And finally, Step 3, when she asks him about the station being haunted, he gives her that awful callous dismissal we talked about earlier, just a crazy woman. The pacing here is incredibly clever. It lulls you into thinking, okay, this is just your standard spooky night shift. But then, the trap snaps shut. Okay, here is the crucial turning point. The watchman receives a shocking phone call. He has just left the woman he believes to be Ashika safely inside the office. His phone rings, and it's the real Ashika on the line. She's calling to say she decided to cancel her trip and won't actually be arriving until tomorrow at noon. No way, right? The sheer terror of this realization is palpable. The watchman hasn't just let a ghost into the office. He has locked himself inside a desolate station with an imposter who has basically been playing a terrifying game of cat and mouse with him this whole time. So let's explore Section 3, the tragic backstory, or the anatomy of an injustice. Because to understand why this spirit is so wrathful and why she's going to such elaborate lengths to trap this one specific watchman, we have to step back. We need to examine the heartbreaking events from exactly 2 months prior. Let's trace this rapid, devastating descent from a father's hope to just
absolute despair. And it's driven entirely by corruption. Look at how fast this all happens. 2 months ago, Ramesh passes the exam with top marks. He goes home, joyfully tells his wife, Geeta, that they can finally afford to send their daughter to a good school. But days later, the job is stolen by someone with lower marks but better connections. The heartbreak is just too much, and shortly after, Ramesh takes his own life, leaving a note. The very next day, his grieving widow, Geeta, goes to the station simply demanding justice. And who physically assaults her and pushes her out? That very same watchman. That night, completely shattered, Geeta takes her own life on the tracks. That's 2 lives completely extinguished by systemic greed in the blink of an eye.
And Ramesh's suicide note perfectly captures the painful reality of this unfairness. This world is very bad. Here only he moves forward who has connections at the top. That sentiment, that isn't just fiction for millions of people around the world. It's an agonizing realization that your merit literally doesn't matter when the deck is stacked against you by the privileged. It is this exact hopelessness that ultimately transforms into Geeta's supernatural rage, giving birth to the haunting of Ramganj Station.
And that brings us right to Section 4, the cycle of vengeance, looking at the karma at Ramganj. Here, the supernatural elements are finally revealed not as random scares, but as highly targeted karmic retribution. Geeta's spirit isn't just lashing out blindly. We can really see the true nature of the haunting here. She is executing a very calculated revenge plan against those who perpetuate or benefit from the corrupt system. The imposter in the office? Yeah, that was Geeta all along. She specifically targets the complicit, namely the watchman, because he was the physical enforcer of that corrupt system, the guy who violently silenced her when she asked for justice. And she targets the beneficiaries, like Ashika, because Ashika represents the exact type of unearned privilege that drove her husband to his death. Geeta is basically balancing the scales of justice that society broke.
And the watchman meets a truly violent end, paying the ultimate price for his complicity and his cruelty towards a grieving widow. In this incredibly terrifying sequence, right as a train's horn blares in the distance, Geeta's spirit violently strangles the life out of him. He is punished right there, on the exact same platform where he once pushed her away. It's brutal, it's visceral, and honestly, within the logic of the story, it is entirely earned.
But the story doesn't end there. As the real Ashika finally arrives the next morning, completely oblivious to the absolute bloodbath from the night before, she is warmly greeted by a woman who offers to open the office for her. That woman? It's Geeta, posing as the station master. Ashika walks right into the trap. And this leaves us pondering a really dark, lingering question about guilt and consequence. Did Ashika actually deserve to walk into Geeta's trap, or is she just another victim of a corrupt system? I mean, sure, she benefited from it, but did she architect it? Where exactly does the line between being a beneficiary of injustice and a perpetrator of it actually lie? It's a haunting ending, for sure, and one that forces us to look at our own privileges and the unseen costs they might carry. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I highly recommend keeping this question in the back of your mind the next time you see someone cut to the front of the line. Catch you next time!